Hey there, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
I am.
Today, we're tackling something I think we all struggle with.
Ooh, what's that?
Our inner critic. That
Yes.
voice inside that's always telling us we're not good enough. You're not doing enough.
Right.
You'll never measure up.
We've all got one.
It's like having a grumpy roommate in our own heads.
I know.
But get this. You sent in the book, Become Best Friends with Your Inner Critic. And it blew my mind
How so?
because it suggests we don't fight the inner critic.
That's an interesting premise.
We don't try to silence it.
Yeah.
We befriend it.
Really?
Now, I know that sounds a little crazy.
Befriend it? Huh?
Right. Like, why would we want to be friends with this voice that's constantly putting us down?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive.
But the book argues that there's a lot more to this inner critic than meets the eye. So before we dive into the befriending part, let's go back to basics for a sec.
Okay.
What exactly is this inner critic? Like, where does it come from?
Well, it's not like we're born with this pre-programmed negativity.
Right.
Think about the messages you received as a child. Things you heard from parents and teachers. Maybe don't be too loud.
Yeah.
Try harder. Be good.
Be perfect.
Right, exactly. Those messages, even if they were well-intentioned, can shape how we view ourselves and our abilities.
So it's like our inner critic is this echo of those early influences.
Precisely. It's absorbing those messages, internalizing them, and then using them against us later in life.
Oh, wow.
And then on top of that, we layer in societal expectations and cultural pressures.
Yeah.
What does success look like? How are we supposed to behave? What's good? What's bad?
All those shoulds.
Exactly. These messages, often subtle and unspoken, contribute to our inner critic's repertoire.
So it's not just our parents, it's the whole world chiming in with its own set of rules and judgments.
Exactly.
No wonder our inner critic can feel so overwhelming sometimes.
It's like a chorus of negativity.
And get this, the book takes it a step further with this idea of inner critic personalities.
Personalities. Tell me more.
Right. It outlines 5 main types.
Okay.
And I'm curious to hear if any of these resonate with you.
Alrighty.
So first up, we have the perfectionist.
The perfectionist?
Always striving for those impossibly high standards.
Yeah.
Then there's the guilt tripper,
Interesting.
keeping you stuck in the past with all those should-haves and past mistakes.
Right.
Next is the pessimist.
Okay.
All doom and gloom,
Oh, boy.
constantly warning of worst-case scenarios.
The sky is falling type.
Exactly. Then we have the overachiever, driven by that relentless more mentality.
I've met a few of those.
Always pushing, never satisfied.
Yeah.
And finally, there's the not enough voice,
Ooh, I know that one.
whispering those subtle but persistent feelings of inadequacy. So which one do you think might be your dominant critic?
Oh, wow. There are a lot of options to choose from. I'd say a combo of the perfectionist and the pessimist.
Really?
Yeah. It's like I'm constantly striving for these impossible standards, but I'm also terrified of failing.
So it's like you're caught in this loop of wanting to be perfect, but also being afraid to even try.
It's a bit of a struggle sometimes.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
For me, it's definitely a mix of the overachiever and the not enough voice.
Interesting.
It's like this constant pressure to do more, be better, but also this nagging feeling that I'll never be good enough no matter what I do.
Oh, I see.
So we've established that we all have this inner critic,
Yeah,
and it can be pretty darn loud sometimes.
it can be.
But here's the mind-blowing part.
What's that?
The book says we shouldn't fight it.
We shouldn't.
We should actually try to befriend it.
Befriend it. Now that's where I get lost.
Right. It sounds a little crazy.
Yeah.
Why would we want to be friends with this voice that's constantly putting us down?
Yeah, I mean, it's the voice of judgment and negativity.
Right.
Why would we want to get cozy with that?
It's a good question.
Eh.
But the book argues that the inner critic, despite its harsh tone, is ultimately trying to protect us. Protect us. Really? How can constant criticism be protective?
Think about it like this. Imagine your inner critic is this well-meaning but totally overprotective friend.
Okay.
It might say, don't try that, you'll fail. Or, you're not good enough, so don't even bother.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Not because it wants to hurt you,
Right.
but because it's afraid of you getting hurt.
So it's like that friend who's always warning you about all the dangers, even if they're totally imaginary.
Exactly. They mean well, but their methods are a little misguided.
Yeah, and it gets annoying after a while.
Right.
So if the inner critic is like this overprotective friend, how do we change that dynamic?
That's where the befriending part comes in.
Okay.
We start by acknowledging that the inner critic is a part of us, a
Uh-huh.
part that's trying to help.
Even if it's going about it the wrong way.
Exactly. Just like that overprotective friend. We
Mhm.
can't just yell at them and tell them to go away.
That's just going to make them louder.
Right. So instead of battling this voice, we try to understand it. We
Mm.
try to figure out what it's so afraid of.
It's like having a conversation with that overprotective friend.
Yeah, exactly. You might say, hey, I get that you're worried about me, but maybe we can find a less stressful way to handle things.
So instead of yelling at the inner critic, we're trying to have a heart-to-heart with it.
It's about shifting from an adversarial relationship to a more compassionate one.
Okay, I'm starting to see the logic here.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put this befriending thing into practice?
Well, the book offers some practical tools to help us with this.
Ooh, practical tools. I love those. Lay it on me.
One that I think could be really helpful is the 4-step clarity process.
The clarity process.
Think of it as a way to hit pause on that chaotic mental movie the inner critic loves to play.
Okay, I'm all for a hidden pause on that mental movie. What are the steps?
The first step is simply to pause
Pause.
and name the thought.
Name it. Okay.
What exactly is your inner critic saying? Write it down. Get specific.
Hmm.
This brings it out of the shadows
Okay.
and helps you take back some control.
Got it.
For example, let's say your inner critic is saying,
Hmm.
you're going to mess up this presentation
Uh-oh.
and everyone will think you're incompetent.
Ouch. That sounds familiar.
Right.
Yeah.
So you pause and you name the thought.
Pause. Name it. Okay.
Then the next step is to test for truth.
Test for truth. How do we do that?
We challenge the validity of that critical thought.
Okay.
Do we have any real evidence to support it?
Hmm. Good point.
For example, have you really messed up every presentation you've ever given?
Well, no. Not everyone.
Right.
But there have been some rough ones.
Okay, but are your colleagues really just waiting for you to slip up so they can judge you?
I don't think so.
Right.
They're actually pretty supportive.
Exactly. Often when we examine those critical thoughts closely, we discover they're not really based on facts. They're based on assumptions and fears,
Right.
not reality.
Okay, so we've paused, we've named the thought, and we've challenged its truth. What's next?
Now we move on to reframing the thought.
Reframing. Okay, I like that word.
Instead of, I'm going to mess up this presentation, you might reframe it to something like, I'm feeling nervous about this presentation,
Okay.
but I've prepared well and I'm going to do my best. Or, it's okay to feel nervous. It means I care about doing a good job.
I love that. It's taking that negative spin and turning it into something more neutral, maybe even positive.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth and final step is choosing a new perspective.
Ooh, a new perspective.
This is about shifting from a fixed
A
mindset,
fixed mindset.
where we see mistakes as permanent failures.
Yeah, that's my inner critic's favorite move.
Right. To a growth mindset,
A growth mindset.
where challenges are seen as opportunities for learning.
So instead of seeing a potential stumble during a presentation as proof that I'm a failure,
Yeah,
I could see it as a chance to learn and improve for next time.
precisely.
It's like upgrading that security system. Instead of just reacting with fear, we're adding in some logic and perspective.
I love that analogy. It perfectly captures the essence of what we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, so we've got this clarity process to help us challenge those negative thoughts. But the book doesn't stop there, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It actually suggests we go a step further and have a dialogue with our inner critic.
Right?
Now, this is where I get really intrigued, but also a little skeptical. Is this like writing a formal invitation?
A formal invitation.
Dear inner critic, please accept this invitation to tea and crumpets so we can hash out our differences.
Uh-huh. Not quite that literal.
Okay, so no crumpets.
No crumpets.
But the idea is to engage with the inner critic in a more compassionate way.
Exactly. It's about understanding, not arguing.
So instead of saying, shut up, inner critic, you're wrong, I might say, hey, inner critic, I hear you're worried about this presentation. What are you most afraid of?
Exactly. It's about shifting from that adversarial relationship to a more collaborative one.
So it's like I'm taking that critical voice out of my head and putting it on stage.
On stage.
Right, where I can observe it with a bit more detachment.
That's a great visual.
Like, okay, inner critic, let's hear what you have to say. But I'm not going to automatically believe everything you tell me.
Exactly. And from that place of observation, you can start to have that compassionate dialogue. The book even walks you through a sample dialogue, which is really insightful. It's all about asking questions like, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
What do you want from me?
Hmm.
How can we work together?
So it's about building a relationship with that inner voice rather than battling it.
Precisely. And that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive,
Really?
where we'll explore the connection between the inner critic and shame.
Ooh, shame.
Yeah.
Now that's a topic I think a lot of us can relate to,
Yeah, it's a big one.
especially in the workplace. So buckle up, folks. We're going to dive into that in part 2.
I'm ready. All right, so shame. Where do we even begin with that?
Right. It's like this heavy blanket that just smothers any sense of confidence or self-worth.
And you know what? The book actually has a whole chapter dedicated to shame.
Really. I'm not surprised. It feels like shame and the inner critic are best buddies.
They definitely go hand in hand. Remember how we talked about the inner critic's role as this misguided protector?
Yeah, like that overprotective friend who's constantly warning us about dangers that don't even exist.
Exactly. Well, shame is like the weapon the inner critic uses to try and keep us safe.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work?
Think about it. When we experience shame, we feel exposed,
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable, like we're not good enough.
Yeah, it's like that feeling of being judged and found wanting.
Right. And the inner critic believes that by making us feel ashamed, it can prevent us from putting ourselves in situations where we might experience that judgment again.
So it's like the inner critic is saying, if you feel bad enough about yourself, you won't even try. And then you won't risk failing or being rejected.
Exactly. It's a twisted kind of logic, but it makes sense when you consider the inner critic's motivations.
It's like that overprotective friend who says, don't even bother applying for that job. You won't get it anyway. You'll just be disappointed.
Right. It's trying to protect us from potential pain, but it's actually keeping us stuck.
And I think that's especially true in the workplace.
Oh, absolutely. Think about all the pressures we face at work.
Yeah.
Deadlines, performance reviews, competition.
The constant need to prove ourselves.
Right. It's like a breeding ground for shame.
Because the stakes feel so high.
Exactly. And when we inevitably make a mistake or things don't go as planned, that inner critic swoops in with a double dose of shame.
And that's when things can really spiral. Like we start to question our abilities, our competence, even our worth as a person.
And the book digs into the roots of this shame, too.
Oh, tell me more about that. I'm always curious about the why behind these things.
Well, it starts with those early messages we received.
Right, like those things we heard from parents and teachers.
Exactly. Maybe we were praised for our achievements, but criticized for our mistakes.
So it's like we learn to associate our worth with our performance.
Right. And then we add in all those societal expectations,
Like those unspoken rules about what it means to be successful, to be valuable.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the beast of social comparison.
Oh, social media, don't even get me started.
It's a minefield of shame triggers.
Because everyone's presenting their highlight reel, their perfectly curated lives.
Right. And it's easy to fall into that trap of comparing ourselves and coming up short.
So we've got this shame cycle, fueled by those early messages, societal expectations, and social media. It feels like a pretty tough cycle to break.
It can be, but the book offers some really helpful strategies for tackling this shame. And one of the most powerful ones is the BFF method.
BFF method. Is that like be friends forever with our shame?
Not exactly. It stands for befriend, frame, and forgive. And it builds on all those concepts we've been discussing.
Okay, I'm starting to see how it all connects. Befriend the inner critic, reframe those negative thoughts, and then forgive ourselves for those perceived imperfections.
Exactly. It's about shifting our whole relationship with shame. Instead of trying to avoid it or suppress it, we learn to acknowledge it, understand it, and ultimately release it.
Okay, I like the sound of that. Let's break it down step by step. What does the befriend part look like in practice?
Well, it starts with simply noticing when those feelings of shame arise. Instead of pushing them away, we turn towards them with curiosity.
Okay, so it's like saying, hello, shame, I see you there. What are you trying to tell me?
Exactly. We get curious about the triggers, the thoughts, the bodily sensations that accompany shame.
So it's about bringing those shadowy feelings into the light, rather than trying to keep them hidden away in the dark corners of our minds.
Right. And once we've acknowledged those feelings of shame, we can move on to the frame step.
And that's where the reframing techniques we talked about earlier come in.
Exactly. We start to challenge those negative thoughts that fuel the shame. We ask ourselves, is this thought really true?
Is there another way to look at this situation?
Exactly. We start to look for evidence that contradicts those shame-based beliefs.
So instead of saying, I'm such a failure because I made a mistake on that project, I might reframe it to, Everyone makes mistakes. It's how we learn and grow.
Exactly. And the final step, forgive, is where the real magic happens. This is where we practice self-compassion.
Ooh, self-compassion. That's a concept I need to work on. I'm way better at being compassionate to others than I am to myself.
That's so common. But the book emphasizes that self-compassion is essential for healing shame. It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we would offer a friend who's struggling.
So instead of beating myself up for that mistake, I might say to myself, it's okay, you're human. You did your best with the information you had at the time.
Exactly. And it's not about making excuses for our actions. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress and we all deserve compassion, especially from ourselves.
I love that. It's
Yes.
about giving ourselves permission to be imperfect, to learn and grow from our mistakes, and to move forward without carrying that weight of shame.
Exactly. And the book offers a really helpful metaphor for understanding self-compassion. It talks about imagining yourself as a loving parent, comforting a child who's upset. Would you scold that child for making a mistake?
No, of course not. I'd offer them comfort and support and help them see that it's okay to make your mistakes.
Right. And we can offer that same kind of loving support to ourselves. We can acknowledge our pain, validate our feelings, and remind ourselves that we're worthy of love and compassion even when we mess up.
This BFF method is really starting to resonate with me. It feels like a much more empowering approach than just trying to ignore or suppress those feelings of shame.
It is. It's about reclaiming our power and choosing self-compassion over self-criticism.
And the book also talks about the importance of actually speaking those words of self-compassion out loud.
Yes, it can feel a little awkward at first,
Oh, I bet.
but there's something so powerful about hearing those words of kindness and understanding coming from our own mouths.
Like we're finally giving ourselves permission to be gentle with ourselves.
Exactly. And the book provides some really helpful self-compassion phrases to get you started. Phrases like, I'm doing the best I can, may I be kind to myself in this moment, or even just, it's okay to not be okay.
I'm definitely going to write those down and try them out. It feels like a much-needed antidote to all that inner criticism.
It is. And the more we practice self-compassion, the more natural it becomes. It's like we're rewiring our brains to respond to challenges with kindness rather than judgment.
I love that. So we've talked about befriending the inner critic, tackling shame, and practicing self-compassion. It feels like we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. And there's so much more we could dive into. The book goes into detail about handling those perfectionistic tendencies.
Ooh, perfectionism. That's a big one for me.
It's a common struggle, especially for high achievers.
And it also explores how the inner critic can impact our relationships.
Right. It talks about those fears of rejection and those patterns of people-pleasing that can show up in our interactions with others.
Oh, I definitely recognize those patterns in myself. I'm a recovering people pleaser.
And the book even delves into the connection between the inner critic and body image. It's so easy to get caught in that cycle of self-criticism, comparing ourselves to those unrealistic ideals that are constantly bombarding us.
Ugh, tell me about it. Social media can be a real trigger for those body image issues. But what I'm hearing from you and from this book is that there's a path to healing. It's not about silencing the inner critic completely, but about transforming that relationship into something more supportive and compassionate.
Exactly. And the book provides practical tools and strategies to help us do just that. It's about recognizing that we're all worthy of love and acceptance, just as we are.
This deep dive has been so insightful. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of the inner critic and how to shift that dynamic from one of conflict to one of collaboration and support. And I'm excited to explore the workbook that comes with the book.
Yes, the workbook is fantastic. It's packed with exercises and journaling prompts to help you really put these concepts into practice.
Like what kind of exercises? Give me a sneak peek.
Well, there are exercises for identifying your dominant inner critic personality. There are guided meditations for cultivating self-compassion.
Oh, I love guided meditations.
And there are even writing prompts to help you explore those deeper beliefs and patterns that might be fueling your inner critic.
It sounds like a treasure trove of self-discovery. And it even has a 30-day plan, right?
Yes, it's like a step-by-step roadmap for transforming your relationship with your inner critic.
So it's not just a random collection of exercises. It's a carefully designed sequence that takes you on a journey of inner healing.
Exactly. And it recognizes that this is a process. It's not about overnight transformation. It's about making small, consistent changes that add up over time.
It's like we're training our minds to respond to challenges with kindness rather than judgment.
Precisely. And the 30-day plan provides that structure and support to help you stay on track.
And I'm definitely going to check out that workbook. It sounds like an incredible resource for anyone who's ready to finally make peace with their inner critic.
It is. And you know, what's so inspiring about this book is that it's not just about individual healing, it's about creating a more compassionate world. Imagine what would happen if more of us learned to befriend our inner critics.
Right. It's like that ripple effect.
Yeah.
When we heal ourselves, we heal the world around us.
Exactly. We become more understanding, more forgiving, not just of ourselves, but of everyone around us.
It's like we're breaking free from that cycle of judgment and criticism and creating a new paradigm of kindness and acceptance.
And that's a world I want to live in.
Me too. So what's the biggest takeaway you hope our listeners glean from this deep dive?
That they are not alone in this struggle. We all have inner critics, but those voices don't have to control our lives. We have the power to choose compassion over criticism, to reframe those negative thoughts, and to cultivate a more loving and supportive relationship with ourselves.
That's a beautiful message. And you know, this deep dive has left me feeling hopeful and empowered. I'm excited to explore the workbook further and start integrating these practices into my daily life. What about you? What's one thing you're going to take away from this deep dive?
I think for me, it's a reminder to be gentle with myself. We all make mistakes. We all have those moments of self-doubt, but it's in those moments that self-compassion is most important.
That's so true. It's easy to be hard on ourselves, but kindness is always the better choice.
Always. And, you know, the book leaves us with this really powerful thought. It says that when we befriend our inner critics, we're not just healing ourselves, we're healing generations past and future.
Wow, I love that. It's like we're breaking those inherited patterns of self-criticism and creating a new legacy of self-love and acceptance.
Exactly. And that's a legacy worth leaving behind.
This deep dive has been truly inspiring. I hope our listeners feel encouraged to embark on their own journeys of befriending their inner critics. It's a journey worth taking, and it just might change your life.
I think it will.
Okay, so we've been talking about all this stuff about the inner critic and how to befriend it,
Yeah.
but I'm curious about something.
What's that?
Like, what happens when more people start to embrace these ideas? What happens if we zoom out
Yeah.
and look beyond just our own personal struggles with this voice in our heads?
Hmm.
What would the world look like if more people learned to befriend their inner critic instead of letting it run the show?
Well, I think we would see a huge shift in how we relate to each other.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of that culture of judgment and comparison,
Yeah.
we might actually move towards a culture of kindness and acceptance.
Right? Because right now it's like everyone's walking around with this inner critic on their shoulder,
Mm-hmm.
whispering all these negative things in their ear.
Yeah.
And it's not just affecting them personally.
Right.
It's also affecting how they interact with others.
Yeah. It's like we're all projecting our own insecurities and self-doubts onto each other.
Totally. Like that saying, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah, exactly.
But in this case, it's more like self-critical people criticize people.
Uh-huh. That's a good one.
Because if we're constantly judging ourselves,
Yeah.
we're more likely to judge others too.
Right. Absolutely. It's like this chain reaction of negativity.
And it can be so subtle sometimes.
Mhm.
Like maybe we don't even realize we're doing it,
Right.
but it creates this atmosphere of tension and competition.
Yeah. And it prevents us from really connecting with each other.
Exactly. Because instead of seeing each other as allies,
Mm-hmm.
we start to see each other as threats.
Yeah. We're all just trying to protect ourselves from getting hurt.
But what if instead of protecting ourselves,
Yeah.
we started supporting each other?
That'd be amazing.
Right. Like imagine a world where instead of tearing each other down,
Mm-hmm.
we actually built each other up.
Can you imagine?
And I think that starts with each of us individually befriending our own inner critics.
Right. Because when we learn to be more compassionate and understanding towards ourselves,
Mhm.
it naturally extends outward.
Yeah. It's like we break free from that cycle of negativity
Mm-hmm.
and we create a new pattern of kindness and acceptance.
I love that.
And I think that would have a ripple effect,
Oh, yeah.
not just in our personal relationships,
Mm-hmm.
but in the world at large.
Absolutely. I think it would revolutionize the way we work.
Totally. Because right now it feels like so many workplaces are driven by fear and competition.
Mm-hmm.
People are afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah.
They're afraid to speak up.
Right.
They're afraid to be themselves.
Because they're worried about being judged.
Exactly.
And that stifles creativity.
Oh, totally. It's like everyone's playing it safe.
Yeah.
Just trying to blend in and not rock the boat.
But what if we could create a work environment
Well,
where people felt safe to take risks,
to experiment.
to fail forward?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because failure is not the end of the world.
It's just a stepping stone.
It's an opportunity to learn and grow.
Yeah. And I think if we could shift that mindset,
Mm.
we would see so much more creativity and innovation in the world.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think that same principle applies to other areas of life too,
Yeah.
like our relationships,
For communities,
our politics.
everything. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
We're all human.
We all make mistakes.
We all have fears and insecurities.
And we all deserve kindness and compassion.
That's so powerful. And, as we're talking about this,
Yeah.
I keep thinking about the book's message of self-trust,
Hmm.
because I think that's really at the heart of all of this.
Oh, absolutely. When we befriend our inner critic,
Yeah.
we're essentially building a stronger foundation of self-trust.
We're learning to trust our own judgment,
Yeah. Our own intuition.
our own abilities.
We're no longer seeking validation from external sources.
Yeah, because we found it within ourselves.
And that's such a freeing experience.
So freeing.
Yeah.
It's like we finally have permission to be ourselves,
To embrace our imperfections.
to follow our passions.
To live a life that's true to who we are.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
I really feel like I've gained a new perspective on the inner critic
Hmm.
and on the power of self-compassion.
It's not about silencing that voice completely.
Right.
It's about transforming it into something more supportive.
Like a guide instead of a judge.
Exactly.
And I'm excited to keep exploring these ideas
Yeah, me too.
and to see how they can help me create a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
I think they will.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive.
It has.
I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as we have.
Me too.
And I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
Be kind to yourself.
Yes, always.
You are worthy of love and compassion,
Absolutely.
just as you are.
And remember,
You're not alone on this journey.
we're all in this together.
So thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you.
And until next time.
See ya.